Cutting edge and a bit short because we want to turn to the Shadow Home Secretary, Chris Philp, who joins us. Good morning to you, Chris Philp. What are you going to be doing today to celebrate the 5th anniversary of Brexit?
Well, I'm going to be visiting some schools in Croydon, and I'm going to be meeting some constituents with various problems at a constituency surgery, which is what lots of MPs will be doing on a Friday. But what I'll also be doing is working out plans to, in the immigration space, which obviously as Shadow Home Secretary I'm working on, to limit immigration, which of course post-Brexit we can do. We've got to make sure we take advantage fully of those opportunities. I know that Mel Stride, the Shadow Chancellor, will be working out ways of boosting immigration growth by taking advantage of the freedoms to make sure that regulations on UK business are not too burdensome. I know Mel will be working on that. But forgive me,
but
being Croydon today.
But there's a huge question around that, isn't there? I mean, you say, you know, in your current brief, working around what you can do about immigration now that we have that control post-Brexit. But the Tories have been in control ever since Brexit up until a few months ago, and immigration has absolutely ballooned.
Yeah, and Kemi Badenoch and I have said very clearly, since we took up our current roles a couple of months ago, that was a mistake. There's no question. We've been very honest. That was a serious mistake, and that's got to be sorted out. And the way we're going to sort that out, if we get into power again, is to have a legally binding hard cap. And we'll obviously say what the number is before the election. But I'll tell you this: it will be a lot lower than the numbers we've recently seen, and it'll even be a lot lower than those forecasts that the Office for National Statistics put out a couple of days ago, because the numbers have been far too high. It's actually bad for the economy because it reduces per capita wages, and actually people coming in on low incomes or even not working actually are a drain on the taxpayer as well. So that will not, under a future Conservative government, I can tell you this, that will not be continuing. Now, a journalist asked Keir Starmer a couple of days ago whether he would take action by following our call, the Conservatives' call, for a hard, legally binding annual cap, where you basically just stop giving out visas when you hit a certain very low number. And Keir Starmer said no, he's not gonna do that. So it's quite clear this Labour government are not gonna sort this out.
Yes, but with respect, Mr. Philp, you had 14 years to implement a hard cap and to stick to a hard cap, and you didn't do that. And you will know that the ONS figures that you just quoted that showed that net migration up by 5 million people coming to this country by 2032, which is 9 Manchesters in 7 years, by the way, is based on previous data. That's data that happened under your watch. So you didn't get a grip on migration, and that's why we're seeing the figures coming through now.
Well, first of all, between 2010 and up to about 2020 or 2021, we were still obviously in the European Union, and then we were in the exit mechanisms afterwards, where free movement still applied, right? So it was impossible to cap European free movement while in the EU. Of course, what we could do, and this goes right back to the Cameron government, we could cap non-European immigration, so people coming into the UK from outside of Europe, like from Africa or somewhere. Now, that was capped. Now, David Cameron actually had a cap of just 20,000 a year, which covered obviously all the countries outside Europe, so India, America, everywhere. And that 20,000 a year cap, which is quite a low number, did work. And that was successful. And that was under a Conservative government. Now, there were a couple of years immediately after COVID when the numbers were, as I've already acknowledged, like far too high. And that was a mistake. And that's why we now need that hard cap concept that did work under Cameron. It was 20,000 for non-Europeans. We need to reintroduce that hard cap where you just basically stop giving out visas once the number has been met. That will be a very low number. I can tell you that now, a very low number. And it will be entirely prioritised towards people with high levels of skill who are going to earn high wages. And because that's the kind of immigration that might help small numbers of very highly skilled people earning very high wages. That is what the new leadership of the Conservative Party will do. We are under new leadership, and we are going to take a different approach.
Yeah, it's interesting, though, isn't it? Because when you look at the polls, and particularly on this issue, the one party that people trust if they have concerns about this is the Reform Party. I mean, they're holding a conference tonight in Kemi Badenoch's constituency as they continue to smash you in the polls. I mean, that's got to be a concern. It's time to talk, isn't it?
Well, they're not smashing the Conservatives in the polls, obviously. Most polls over the last 3 or 4 months have the Conservatives ahead of Reform. And as we saw, and I mean, in the Reform, I mean, Nigel Farage has said he doesn't want to do any deals, right? So, and he said he wants to destroy the Conservative Party. But in fact, what Reform did at the last election was they did exactly what we warned about. They handed Labour a landslide. Labour have got a massive parliamentary majority. On only 34% of the vote at the last election, and it's obviously gone down a lot since then. And because essentially in the number of seats where we might have retained a Conservative MP, Reform didn't win, didn't even come close to winning, but got enough votes to hand the seat to Labour. And we've now got left-wing, woke Labour MPs who won those seats because Reform took a few votes that would ordinarily be Conservative, let Labour in, and now they're doing, like, they've introduced a bill yesterday, you probably saw, which completely cancels the Rwanda scheme. So we can't now send people, the government, even if it wanted to, couldn't send people to Rwanda. That would have worked. That would have stopped the channel crossings. We saw it work in Australia. But in government, a couple of years ago, we passed an act of parliament called the Illegal Migration Act, which said that illegal immigrants can never, ever get citizenship, right? That was the right thing to do that we did in government, the Conservatives. Labour are now going to scrap that. So illegal immigrants can get citizenship, which is a complete disgrace. And because Reform, unfortunately, stood in all those seats last summer, and they handed Labour that landslide, this is what Starmer is now doing with that landslide, giving illegal immigrants citizenship rights. OK,
Chris Philp, we're out of time, sadly, but good to talk to you today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And actually, Labour's numbers on successfully deporting illegal migrants without a need for a Rwanda-style agreement.
What are we to make of this? Because, I mean, people wanted Brexit. It was a democratic vote. However, people generally seem to be disappointed in what it's delivered.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll always be hard to tell, actually, because immediately after leaving the European Union on the 31st of January 2020, we then, 2 months later, were hit by a once-in-a-generation pandemic, which wiped off all kinds, all global economy, effectively. So those trade deals that you would have thought that you could do, the progress that you could have kicked on with post-Brexit, all of that came sort of crashing down. So I think the impetus of eventually leaving the EU was somewhat curtailed to a point where I think people now argue over, well, are we better off in or are we better off out in terms of the economy? I think we'll really never know for sure. But the benefits are still there. You know, the opportunity to go and do your trade deals with bilateral countries without having to go through the clunky bureaucratic negotiation system of the EU is a benefit. The idea of being able to spend money in this country rather than giving it to the EU is a benefit. Having a Australian points-based system, something that Boris Johnson used to talk about when he was Prime Minister, allowing people, allowing to choose the people that you want to come into this country is a benefit. Now, that's the framework, and therefore Brexit should be a benefit. But has it been implemented in a way in which everybody's jumped onto those freedoms? Have they been used to the full extent? I think is something that remains to be seen. And I don't think it was helped by the chopping and changing of Prime Ministers, as you say, Stephen.
Well, no. And there were also many claims made in the run-up to the 2016 vote, weren't there? So we had the £350 million for the NHS on the side of that bus, one of the most famous images of that campaign, and also the promise to control our borders. So people who voted for Brexit, they'll look back on those claims and say, well, we lied to. We haven't got control of either of those things.
So that's the quite an irony, really, because, of course, lots of people voted to leave the EU because they wanted to take control of their borders. They wanted to stop, effectively, the small boats crisis, which has obviously grown over the last 5 years. The idea that actually maybe being part of the EU, where you can negotiate better with France or with Germany, where there's a whole flux of people moving right across Europe before people even get to France, particularly in Italy as well, they're facing huge problems. Would we have been better off halting that crisis by still being in the EU? I mean, the irony that we've left in the situation seems to have got worse. We'd be lost on those people that are still claiming that we're better off in. But